The courtroom was thick with tension that morning. You could practically feel the anger hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. At the center of it all sat an elderly woman in a wheelchair, looking small and confused as her 3 adult children prepared to battle over her future. Helen Rodriguez had raised triplets by herself after her husband died young. Now at 78, with her memory starting to slip away piece by piece, she found herself at the center of a legal war that would have broken her heart if she fully understood what was happening. Judge Patricia Williams had seen plenty of family disputes in her 20 years on the bench, but something about this case felt different. The 3 siblings sitting across from each other looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Their body language told the whole story: arms crossed, backs turned, eyes avoiding contact. These weren't just strangers arguing over an inheritance. These were siblings who had once shared everything, now ready to tear each other apart. Robert was the oldest by 12 minutes, and he never let anyone forget it. At 45, he had built a successful medical practice and lived in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. His expensive suit and confident posture screamed success. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to making life-and-death decisions. "Your Honor," Robert began, adjusting his tie, "I believe I'm the most qualified to care for our mother. I have the financial resources to provide her with the absolute best care available. Private nurses, the finest facilities, top specialists. Money is no object when it comes to Mom's well-being." He gestured toward his mother with the practiced precision of someone presenting a medical case. "She needs professional care around the clock. I can afford that. My siblings unfortunately cannot." The words hit like a slap across the face. Linda, the only daughter, sat up straighter in her chair. Her teacher's instinct kicked in, the same tone she used when a student said something particularly unfair on the playground. "Money isn't everything, Robert," Linda shot back, her voice shaking slightly. "Mom doesn't need some cold, sterile facility. She needs love. She needs family. She needs someone who actually spends time with her." Linda had taught elementary school for 22 years before retiring early to help care for her teenage daughter. Her clothes were neat but clearly not expensive. Her hands showed the wear of someone who did her own housework and gardening. But her eyes burned with a fierce protectiveness that any mother would recognize. "I've been the one visiting Mom every week for the past 3 years," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I'm the one who noticed when she started forgetting things. I'm the one who held her hand when she got scared at night. Where were you then, Robert? Too busy with your important surgeon schedule to call?" The 3rd sibling, Danny, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was used to being the forgotten middle child, even though they were all born the same day. Danny worked construction, had calloused hands and a weathered face that made him look older than his brothers and sister. His work boots looked out of place in the formal courtroom, but he held his ground. "You're both missing the point," Danny said quietly. His voice was rougher than his siblings, shaped by years of shouting over machinery and wind. "Mom doesn't want some fancy place, and she doesn't want to be anyone's burden. She told me 100 times she just wants to stay in her own house with her own things, in her own neighborhood." He looked directly at Robert. "You want to stick her in some expensive nursing home where she'll be surrounded by strangers. That's not what she wants." Then he turned to Linda. "And you think you know what's best because you visit the most, but you've got your own daughter to worry about. How are you going to manage both?" Danny's lawyer, a tired-looking man in a wrinkled suit, cleared his throat. "My client proposes to move in with Mrs. Rodriguez. He can work local jobs and be there full-time. His wife is a certified nursing assistant. They have experience with elderly care, and they understand the importance of keeping Mrs. Rodriguez in familiar surroundings." Robert snorted. "Live-in care from someone with no medical training? That's your solution? What happens when she has a medical emergency? What happens when her condition gets worse?" "At least I'll be there," Danny replied. "At least she won't die alone in some facility, wondering why her family abandoned her." The words stung because they all knew there was truth in them. Their mother had spent too many evenings alone already, especially after their father's death 15 years earlier. Each sibling carried guilt about that, but they carried it differently. Judge Williams watched the exchange with growing concern. She had seen families torn apart by these decisions before, but rarely with such venom between siblings. The elderly woman at the center of it all seemed to shrink further into her wheelchair with each angry word. "Excuse me," Helen said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. All three siblings stopped talking and turned toward their mother. "Excuse me, but where's Tommy? Is Tommy coming?" The courtroom fell silent. Robert, Linda, and Danny exchanged confused glances. Their mother often asked about people from her past, old friends, deceased relatives, neighbors from decades ago. But none of them recognized the name Tommy. "Mom, who's Tommy?" Linda asked gently, moving closer to the wheelchair. Helen looked at her daughter with the frustrated expression of someone trying to remember something important that kept slipping away. "Tommy? My Tommy, he should be here. This is important. Where is he?" The siblings looked at each other again, this time with shared confusion rather than anger. Their mother had never mentioned anyone named Tommy before. Robert wondered if it was just another symptom of her declining memory, creating people who didn't exist, mixing up names and faces from different times in her life. Judge Williams made a note on her legal pad. Family dynamics in guardianship cases were always complicated, but this felt like there were pieces missing from the puzzle. The three siblings clearly had no idea who their mother was asking about, yet Helen seemed genuinely distressed by this person's absence. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the judge said kindly, "we're here today to talk about your care. Your children want to make sure you're safe and comfortable." Helen nodded, but her eyes kept searching the courtroom. "But Tommy should be here too. This affects Tommy." Robert leaned over to his lawyer and whispered, "She's clearly confused. This is exactly why she needs professional care. These episodes are getting worse." But Judge Williams had spent years learning to read between the lines in family cases. Something about the way Helen said the name, the certainty in her voice despite her confusion about other things, made the judge wonder if there was more to this story. The lawyer representing Helen's interests, a court-appointed advocate whose job was to focus solely on what was best for her, stood up. "Your Honor, perhaps we should take a short recess. Mrs. Rodriguez seems distressed, and I'd like to speak with her privately." As the courtroom cleared for a 15-minute break, the three siblings found themselves alone together for the first time in months. The silence was uncomfortable, filled with years of unspoken resentments and recent accusations. "We used to be close," Linda said finally, not looking at either of her brothers. "Remember when we were kids? We did everything together." "That was a long time ago," Robert replied, but his voice was softer than it had been in court. Danny kicked at the floor with his work boot. "Maybe we should try to figure out who this Tommy person is." Mom seemed really upset about it. For just a moment, the three siblings were united by their shared concern for their mother and their mutual confusion about this mysterious Tommy. But as soon as they returned to the courtroom, the battle lines were drawn again, and the fight for Helen's future continued. When court resumed after the break, the atmosphere had somehow gotten even more tense. Helen sat quietly in her wheelchair, still occasionally glancing around as if looking for someone. Her three children had returned to their separate corners, and Judge Williams could see that whatever brief moment of unity they might have shared was already forgotten. Robert's lawyer stood first, a sharp woman in a perfectly tailored suit, who spoke with the precision of someone billing by the minute. "Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence of my client's superior qualifications to serve as guardian." She placed a thick folder on the table. "Dr. Robert Rodriguez has a clean financial record, owns his home outright, and has already researched the best memory care facilities in the tri-state area. He's prepared to spend whatever necessary to ensure his mother receives optimal care." Robert nodded confidently. "I've spoken with the director at Sunset Manor. It's the finest facility in the region, specializing in dementia care. They have a waiting list, but they'll make an exception for Mom. The cost is substantial, but I can handle it." Linda's face flushed red. She had driven past Sunset Manor once, a sprawling complex behind tall gates where visitors had to be buzzed in and out. The thought of her mother locked away in such a place made her stomach turn. "That's not a home, that's a prison," Linda said, her teacher's voice carrying clearly across the courtroom. "Mom raised us in a house full of laughter and chaos and love. She doesn't belong in some sterile institution where they drug people to keep them quiet." "That's an unfair characterization," Robert replied coldly. "Sunset Manor provides professional medical care with dignity and respect. Mom will have trained nurses available 24 hours a day." "Trained nurses who don't know her," Linda shot back. "Who don't know that she likes her coffee with exactly 2 sugars, or that she gets anxious when it's too quiet, or that she still sets the table for 4 people every Sunday Because that's what she did for 30 years when we were growing up. Judge Williams watched the exchange with interest. Linda was painting a picture of someone who knew the intimate details of her mother's daily life, while Robert was focused on medical expertise and financial resources. Both had valid points, but there was clearly more to this story. Mrs. Linda Patterson, the judge said, "Tell me about your current living situation and how you propose to care for your mother." Linda straightened in her chair. "I live about 10 minutes from Mom's house. I've been checking on her almost daily for the past year. My daughter Katie is 16 and pretty independent, so I have the time to be there when Mom needs me." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know I can't provide the same level of medical care that Robert's talking about, but I can provide something else. I can make sure she's not just another patient in a room. I can make sure she feels loved and valued and remembered for who she really is." Robert's lawyer shuffled through her papers. "Your Honor, we have some concerns about Mrs. Patterson's financial stability that we'd like to address." Linda's face went pale. She had a sinking feeling about where this was headed. "Mrs. Patterson, is it true that you've been having financial difficulties since your early retirement?" the lawyer asked. "I'm managing fine," Linda replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it also true that you've borrowed money from your mother on several occasions over the past 2 years?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Linda felt every eye in the courtroom on her, including her mother's confused but concerned gaze. Yes, but it wasn't like that," Linda stammered. "Katie needed money for college applications and the car needed repairs, and I was between substitute teaching jobs. Mom offered to help. She wanted to help." Robert leaned forward, his expression a mixture of anger and disappointment. "How much, Linda? How much did you take from her?" "It wasn't taking," Linda said, her voice rising. "It was borrowing. I've been paying it back." "How much?" Robert repeated. Linda looked down at her hands. $12,000 over the course of a year. The number seemed to echo in the silent courtroom. For Robert, it confirmed everything he suspected about his sister's motives. For Danny, it was more money than he saw in 3 months of construction work. For Helen, it was a figure that held no meaning in her confused state. $12,000, Robert said slowly. "No wonder you're so eager to become Mom's guardian." Full access to her finances. Linda's face flushed with anger and hurt. "That's not fair, Robert." "You know that's not what this is about, do I?" Robert replied. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've already started treating Mom's money like your own." Danny had been listening to this exchange with growing frustration. His brother and sister were so focused on their own argument that they seemed to have forgotten their mother was sitting right there, listening to every word. "Stop it," Danny said, his rough voice cutting through their bickering. "Both of you just stop it." He stood up, his work boots heavy on the courtroom floor. "You want to know what I think? I think you're both so worried about winning this fight that you've forgotten what we're really here for." Danny pointed toward his mother. "Look at her. Really look at her. She's scared and confused, and we're sitting here arguing about money and medical facilities and who's the better child. When's the last time either of you asked her what she wants?" Judge Williams had been thinking the same thing. "Mr. Daniel Rodriguez, what is your proposal for your mother's care?" Danny took a deep breath. "Me and my wife Carol live about 20 minutes from Mom's house. Carol's worked as a nursing assistant for 15 years. She knows how to handle medical emergencies, how to manage medications, how to deal with the confusion and mood swings that come with dementia." He gestured toward his mother's house, visible through the courtroom windows. "Mom's lived in that house for 32 years. Her garden is there. Her pictures are there. Her memories are there. Why would we want to take her away from the only place that still makes sense to her?" Robert shook his head. "Danny, you mean well, but you don't understand the complexity of dementia care. As Mom's condition progresses, she'll need more sophisticated medical intervention. What happens when she starts wandering at night? What happens when she forgets how to swallow safely? What happens when she doesn't recognize any of us anymore? Then we'll deal with it," Danny replied simply. "As a family, together, the way families are supposed to." "With what money?" Robert asked. "Have you researched the cost of in-home nursing care? Have you looked into the price of the medical equipment she might need? Have you considered what happens to your own family's finances when you can't work full-time because you're caring for Mom?" Danny's jaw tightened. "Not everything is about money, Robert." "Easy to say when you're not the one who'll have to pay for it," Robert shot back. "I've been supporting this family financially since Dad died. I helped Linda when she was struggling. I've been fixing Mom's roof and paying for her car repairs and making sure her medical bills get handled." "Where were you during all that?" The accusation stung because it held truth. Danny had always been the brother who struggled financially, who needed help more often than he could provide it. He worked hard, but construction jobs were unpredictable and he had his own family to support. "I do what I can," Danny said quietly. "I may not have your money, but I've been there. I've been the one fixing her broken faucets and changing her light bulbs and listening when she calls at midnight because she's scared and can't sleep." Linda watched her brothers argue and felt the weight of their family's history pressing down on her. They had been through this dance so many times over the years. Robert, the successful one, Danny, the struggling one, and her stuck in the middle, trying to keep everyone together. "We're doing it again," she said suddenly. Both her brothers stopped arguing and looked at her. "We're doing exactly what we always do. Robert throws money at the problem. Danny tries to fix it with his hands, and I try to make everyone feel better. And nothing ever gets solved." Helen had been listening to her children argue with increasing agitation. The names and details were confusing to her, but the anger in their voices was clear. She began rocking slightly in her wheelchair, a nervous habit that had developed as her memory worsened. "Where's Tommy?" she asked again, her voice small and worried. "Why isn't Tommy here? He should be here for this." The three siblings stopped their argument and looked at their mother. Once again, they were confronted with the mystery of Tommy, someone who seemed important to Helen but completely unknown to them. Judge Williams made another note. The day had revealed deep fractures in this family, financial concerns and genuine love mixed with decades of resentment, but it had also raised questions that needed answers before any decision could be made about Helen's future. Judge Williams had been on the bench long enough to know when a case had more layers than what appeared on the surface. The constant references to someone named Tommy, combined with the genuine distress in Helen's voice when she mentioned this mysterious person, had been nagging at her all evening after court adjourned. That night, instead of heading straight home, Judge Williams stayed in her office and made a call to the court's family investigator, Angela Martinez. Angela had been working family cases for 12 years and had a talent for uncovering the stories that families sometimes buried so deep they almost forgot them themselves. "Angela, I need you to dig into the Rodriguez family background," Judge Williams said over the phone. "Something doesn't add up. The mother keeps asking for someone named Tommy, and none of her 3 children seem to know who she's talking about." Angela pulled up her laptop. "Could be an old boyfriend, maybe a brother or cousin who died years ago. Sometimes people with dementia get confused about timelines." "That's what I thought at first," the judge replied. "But there's something about the way she says it. Like this Tommy should definitely be here, involved in decisions about her care. It feels more immediate than just a memory from the distant past." "I'll start pulling records first thing tomorrow morning," Angela promised. "Birth certificates, marriage licenses, any legal documents I can find. If there's a Tommy connected to this family, I'll find him." The next morning, Angela started at the county records office. Helen Rodriguez had been born Helen Murphy in 1947, married young to Carlos Rodriguez in 1968, and had given birth to triplets in 1980. The birth certificates for Robert, Linda, and Daniel were all there, filed properly with no irregularities. But as Angela dug deeper into the family's history, she started finding small inconsistencies. Medical records from Helen's pregnancy showed she had been under significant stress during and after the birth. There were notes about postpartum depression, financial strain, and concerns about her ability to care for 3 infants alone after Carlos died in a work accident when the babies were just 6 months old. Angela interviewed neighbors who had lived on the same street for decades. Mrs. Chen, now in her 80s, remembered Helen during those difficult early years. "Oh, that poor girl," Mrs. Chen said, shaking her head sadly. 3 babies and no husband. "I don't know how she managed. There were nights I could hear those babies crying, and I'd go over to help when I could." "Do you remember anyone else helping her? Any family members or friends?" Angela asked. Mrs. Chen paused, thinking. "There was talk, but it was so long ago. Some of the ladies in the neighborhood thought there might have been another baby. But Helen never talked about it, and after a while we all just figured we were mistaken." The comment sent a chill down Angela's spine. "Another baby?" She pressed Mrs. Chen for more details. "It was just gossip, really," Mrs. Chen said. But I remember seeing Helen at the grocery store when the triplets were maybe 2 years old. She looked so tired, so overwhelmed. And she said something strange. She said, "I used to have 4 children to feed, but now it's just 3. I asked her what she meant. But she got this look on her face like she'd said something she shouldn't have, and she changed the subject. Angela spent the rest of the day tracking down hospital records from 1980. It took several phone calls and a court order, but finally she found what she was looking for. Buried in the archived files from County General Hospital was a birth certificate that had never been properly filed with the county records office. Thomas Carlos Rodriguez. Born July 15, 1980, same date as the triplets. Mother Helen Murphy Rodriguez. Father Carlos Rodriguez, deceased. But this birth certificate had a stamp across it that made Angela's breath catch. Adoption placement. Record sealed. Thomas wasn't dead. He had been given up for adoption. Angela immediately started searching adoption records, but they were sealed by law. However, she had connections in the social services department, and after some careful inquiries, she learned that the adoption had been handled through Catholic Family Services. The adoptive family had specifically requested an open adoption arrangement, which meant that under current law, if both biological and adoptive families agreed, contact could be facilitated. It took Angela another 2 days to track down the right person at Catholic Family Services. Sister Margaret, who had been working in adoption services for 40 years, remembered the case clearly. "Oh yes, I remember Helen," Sister Margaret said when Angela called. Such a young woman, barely 19 when she had those babies. Her husband had died and she was trying to raise 3 infants by herself. She was living in a 1-bedroom apartment, working 2 jobs, barely keeping her head above water. "What made her decide to place one of the children for adoption?" Angela asked gently. Sister Margaret sighed. "It wasn't an easy decision. Helen loved all her children desperately, but she was honest about her limitations. She felt she could give 3 children a chance at a good life, but not 4. She wanted Thomas to have opportunities that she couldn't provide. Do you know what happened to Thomas after the adoption? He was placed with a wonderful family, the Barretts. They couldn't have children of their own, and they were thrilled to adopt Thomas. They even kept his first name, just changed his last name to Barrett. They moved to Oregon when Thomas was about 5, but they sent updates for several years. Last I heard, he had grown up to be a fine young man." Angela's heart was racing. "Sister Margaret, is there any way to contact Thomas or his adoptive family? This is for a legal proceeding involving his biological mother." Sister Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Under the new adoption contact laws, if Thomas has registered with the state reunion registry, we can facilitate contact. Let me check our database." 20 minutes later, Sister Margaret called back with news that would change everything. Thomas Barrett registered with the Oregon Reunion Registry 3 years ago. He's been looking for his biological family. I have his current contact information if you need it. That evening, Angela called Judge Williams with her findings. The judge listened in stunned silence as Angela explained what she had discovered. So Helen had 4 children, not 3. She gave up one of the triplets for adoption and never told the other children, Judge Williams summarized. "It gets more interesting," Angela continued. "I called Thomas Barrett this afternoon. He's 43 years old, lives in Portland, Oregon, and works as a social worker specializing in elder care. He's been searching for his birth family for years but never found them because Helen's name was different when he was born, and the adoption agency had limited information." Judge Williams was quiet for a long moment. "What was his reaction when you told him about the guardianship case?" "He wants to come," Angela said. "He's taking time off work and driving down tomorrow. He said he's thought about his birth mother every day for 20 years, wondering if she was okay, wondering if she ever thought about him. And he has no idea that she has dementia? None. I gave him the basic information about her condition and the family dispute, but I thought you should be the one to provide the details." Judge Williams rubbed her temples. In 20 years on the bench, she had never encountered a situation quite like this. A guardianship battle between 3 siblings who didn't know they had a 4th sibling, a mother with dementia who remembered the child she gave up for adoption, but had apparently never told her other children about him. "Angela, I need you to do one more thing," the judge said. "I want you to research Thomas Barrett thoroughly. Education, employment history, criminal background, financial status, everything. If he's going to be part of this case, I need to know who he is. The next morning, Angela presented Judge Williams with a complete profile of Thomas Barrett. College graduate with a degree in social work. 12 years of experience working with elderly clients. Clean criminal record. Stable employment. Married with 2 teenage children. No financial red flags. But most importantly, Thomas Barrett had specialized training in dementia care and had been managing guardianship cases in Oregon for the past 5 years. Judge Williams stared at the file, realizing that this case was about to become much more complicated. In a few hours, she would have to tell 3 siblings that they had a brother they never knew existed. She would have to explain to Thomas Barrett that his birth mother was at the center of a bitter family dispute. And somehow she would have to figure out how this revelation would affect the guardianship decision. As she prepared for court that morning, Judge Williams couldn't help but wonder if Helen's repeated calls for Tommy were more than just confused memories. Maybe on some level she knew exactly what was happening. Maybe she knew that the family needed Thomas to help them find their way back to each other. The morning sun streamed through the courtroom windows as Angela Martinez prepared to present her findings. In a few hours, the Rodriguez family would learn that their family was bigger than they had ever imagined, and their mother's greatest secret was about to become their greatest challenge. The courtroom felt different that morning. Judge Williams had asked for a closed session with just the 3 siblings and their lawyers present. No audience, no court reporter for the moment. Helen had been taken to a comfortable waiting room with a court advocate, told only that there would be a brief delay. Robert, Linda, and Danny sat in their usual spots, but the tension between them seemed less sharp today. Maybe it was exhaustion from 2 days of fighting, or maybe it was the growing realization that their battle was hurting their mother more than helping her. Judge Williams looked at the 3 faces before her and took a deep breath. In all her years of family court, she had never had to deliver news quite like this. Before we continue with the guardianship proceedings, she began carefully, the court investigator has uncovered some information about your family that you need to know. Angela Martinez stood and placed a folder on the table. Her usually confident demeanor seemed subdued, and she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. During my investigation into your family background, Angela began, I discovered something that explains your mother's repeated references to someone named Tommy. Robert leaned forward impatiently. Is this really necessary? Mom mentions lots of people from her past. It's part of her condition. Please let me finish, Angela said. Tommy isn't someone from your mother's distant past. Thomas Carlos Rodriguez is your brother. The silence that followed was so complete that the air conditioning seemed deafeningly loud. Linda was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. That's impossible. We're triplets. There were 3 of us. Angela opened the folder and placed a birth certificate on the table. Actually, there were 4 of you. You were quadruplets. Thomas was born the same day you were, July 15th, 1980. Danny's face had gone completely white. What are you talking about? Mom never. She never said. Your mother gave Thomas up for adoption when you were all about 2 years old, Angela continued gently. She was a young widow trying to raise 4 babies by herself. She made the decision that she could provide a good life for 3 children, but not 4. Robert grabbed the birth certificate and stared at it. His medical training kicked in, analyzing the information with clinical detachment even as his emotions reeled. Same parents, same birth date, same hospital. It was all there in black and white. Where is he now? Linda asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. His name is Thomas Barrett. He was adopted by a family in Oregon, and he's been searching for his birth family for years. When I contacted him yesterday, he immediately asked if he could meet his biological mother and siblings. The 3 siblings looked at each other with expressions of shock, confusion, and something that might have been relief. Finally, an explanation for all those times their mother had seemed sad for no reason. All those moments when she stared out the window as if waiting for someone. He's here, Angela said quietly. He drove down from Oregon yesterday. He's waiting outside hoping to meet you. Robert ran his hands through his hair, his usual composure completely shattered. I don't understand. How could Mom never tell us? How could we have a brother and not know? She was protecting a secret that she thought was best for everyone, Judge Williams explained. But secrets like this have a way of surfacing, especially when someone's memory starts to fade. Your mother's dementia may have made it harder for her to maintain the barriers she built around this memory. Linda was crying now, thinking about all the Mother's Days and birthdays when their mom had seemed distant. All the times she had caught her looking at old photo albums with such sadness. Does Thomas know about us? Danny asked. He knows you exist and he knows about your mother's condition, Angela replied. But he doesn't know about the guardianship dispute. I thought it would be better for you to meet first before we discuss the legal implications. The door to the courtroom opened, and a tall man with dark hair and gentle eyes stepped inside. He looked nervous but determined, wearing a simple button-down shirt and khakis. What struck all three siblings immediately was how familiar he looked. He had Robert's height, Linda's eyes, and Danny's quiet way of moving. Thomas Barrett stopped just inside the door, looking at the three people who were both strangers and family. 43 years of wondering about his biological siblings, and here they were, staring at him with the same mixture of curiosity and shock that he felt. Hi, Thomas said simply. I'm Tommy. The name that their mother had been calling for suddenly made perfect sense. Linda stood up first, her teacher's instinct to welcome someone new overriding her confusion. She walked toward Thomas with tears streaming down her face. I'm Linda, she said. I think I'm your sister. Thomas nodded, his own eyes filling with tears. I've wondered about you my whole life. Robert and Danny approached more cautiously, but the family resemblance was undeniable. They all had the same strong jawline, the same way of tilting their heads when they were thinking. This is incredible, Robert said, his scientific mind still trying to process the situation. Do you have any medical history we should know about? Any genetic conditions? Thomas smiled and Linda laughed despite her tears. That's so Robert. We just met our long-lost brother and he's already taking a medical history. Actually, Thomas said, I work in healthcare too. I'm a social worker, specializing in elder care and guardianship cases. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. Their mother's secret child had grown up to become an expert in exactly the kind of situation that had brought them all together. Danny shook his head in amazement. Mom knew. Somehow she knew we needed you here. Judge Williams had been watching the reunion with professional interest and personal emotion. Mr. Barrett, are you aware of the reason your biological family is in court today? Thomas nodded. The investigator explained that there's a dispute about Mom's care, that you three are fighting over guardianship. He looked at his newly discovered siblings with compassion rather than judgment. I've seen this happen in a lot of families. Caring for someone with dementia is one of the hardest things anyone can go through. It brings out both the best and worst in people. What would you do? Linda asked suddenly. If this was your decision to make? Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. I'd start by asking what Mom wants. Not what we think is best for her, but what she actually wants. And I'd try to find a way for everyone to be involved in her care, instead of fighting over who gets to make all the decisions. Robert frowned. It's not that simple. Someone has to have legal authority to make medical decisions, financial decisions. You're right, Thomas agreed. But legal authority doesn't have to mean cutting everyone else out. I've seen families create care plans where the legal guardian coordinates with other family members. Everyone contributes what they can. Danny looked hopeful for the first time in days. You think that could work with us? I think it's worth trying, Thomas said. If you're all willing to put Mom's needs ahead of your own pride. The words stung, but they rang true. Each of the siblings realized that somewhere along the way, their fight had become more about winning than about their mother's well-being. Judge Williams made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. I'm going to adjourn this hearing for 24 hours. I want all four of you to spend some time together, to get to know each other, and most importantly, to visit with your mother together. She looked directly at Thomas. Mr. Barrett, I'm ordering an expedited background check and psychological evaluation. If everything comes back clear, I want to consider expanding this guardianship case to include you as a potential fourth option. As the siblings left the courtroom together for the first time, Linda linked her arm through Thomas's. I can't believe we have a brother we never knew about. I can't believe I finally found my family, Thomas replied. Even if the circumstances are complicated. Robert walked beside them, still processing everything. Mom's going to be so happy to see you. She's going to be confused too, Danny added practically. We'll need to be patient with her. As they headed toward the room where Helen was waiting, none of them knew quite what to expect. But for the first time since this whole legal battle began, they were walking in the same direction instead of pulling apart. The reunion between Helen and Thomas was nothing like what anyone expected, and everything they hoped for at the same time. When the four siblings walked into the comfortable conference room where Helen was waiting, she looked up from the magazine she wasn't really reading. Her eyes moved from Robert to Linda to Danny, and then stopped when they reached Thomas. For a moment, her confusion seemed to lift completely. Her face brightened with a recognition that went deeper than memory, something that lived in her bones despite the fog of dementia. "Tommy," she said simply, as if he had just stepped out for coffee instead of being gone for 41 years. "There you are. I was wondering when you'd get here." Thomas knelt beside his mother's wheelchair, his eyes filling with tears. "Hi, Mom. I'm sorry it took me so long." Helen reached out and touched his face with trembling fingers, tracing the features that were so familiar yet unknown. "You look just like your father. Carlos would be so proud." The other three siblings watched in amazement as their mother seemed more alert and present than she had been in months. It was as if Thomas's presence had turned up the brightness on a television that had been growing dimmer. "I've missed you so much," Helen whispered, still touching Thomas's face. "I think about you every day. I hope you had a good life." "I did, Mom," Thomas assured her. "I had wonderful parents who loved me, but I always wondered about you, about my brothers and sister." Helen looked around at her other children with sudden clarity. "They don't know, do they? About you?" "They do now," Thomas said gently. "We all know now." Helen's face crumpled slightly. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I never told them. I thought it would be easier if they never knew. I thought they would understand why I had to, why I couldn't." Linda knelt on the other side of the wheelchair and took her mother's hand. "Mom, it's okay. We understand. You did what you thought was best." "But I missed everything," Helen said, looking at Thomas with heartbreak in her eyes. "Your first words, your first steps, teaching you to ride a bike, your graduation. I missed your whole life." Thomas smiled through his tears. "But I'm here now. And I'd love to tell you about all of it if you want to hear." Over the next hour, something magical happened. Helen seemed to grow stronger and more focused as Thomas told her about his childhood, his adoptive parents, his education, his career, his own children. The other siblings added stories about their own lives, and slowly, the family began to form connections that had been missing for decades. When Thomas mentioned that he worked with elderly clients, Helen's eyes lit up. "You help people like me?" "I do," Thomas said. "I help families figure out how to take care of their parents when things get difficult." Helen looked around at all four of her children. "Then you can help them figure out how to take care of me." The simple statement cut through all the legal arguments and bitter disputes of the past week. Here was their mother in a moment of perfect clarity, telling them exactly what they needed to hear. Judge Williams arrived at the end of that first day to check on the family reunion. What she found was four siblings sitting around their mother, laughing over old photo albums that Linda had brought from Helen's house. Thomas was seeing baby pictures of himself for the first time, while his siblings were hearing stories about their early childhood that they had never known. "How is everyone doing?" the judge asked quietly. Robert looked up, and for the first time in days, he didn't look like a man preparing for battle. "Judge Williams, I think we need to talk about a different kind of arrangement." The next morning in court, the atmosphere was completely transformed. Instead of three separate legal teams, the Rodriguez siblings sat together on one side of the courtroom. Thomas had passed his expedited background check with flying colors, and all four lawyers had spent the evening working together instead of against each other. "Your Honor." Robert's lawyer stood up. "My clients would like to propose a joint guardianship arrangement." Judge Williams raised her eyebrows. After days of bitter fighting, this was the last thing she had expected. Linda stood up next. "We've realized that we each have something different to offer Mom. Instead of fighting over who's most qualified, we want to combine our strengths." Thomas remained seated but spoke clearly. "Based on my professional experience and our family discussions, we'd like to propose a rotating care schedule that allows Mom to stay in her own home while ensuring her medical and emotional needs are met." Danny nodded. "We've worked out the details. Thomas will serve as the primary guardian because of his professional background, but all four of us will be involved in Mom's care. Judge Williams looked at the unified family before her and smiled. I'd like to hear the specifics of this arrangement. Robert pulled out a carefully typed document. Thomas will move back to the area and coordinate Mom's overall care. His background in elder care makes him the logical choice to manage medical decisions and navigate the healthcare system. I'll handle the day-to-day care, Linda added. I'll check on Mom daily, help with cooking and cleaning, make sure she takes her medications. I have the time and the relationship with her to provide that consistency. Danny cleared his throat. Carol and I will take weekend shifts, and I'll handle all the home maintenance and safety modifications that Mom's house needs. We'll also be backup support when Linda needs a break. And I'll cover all the medical expenses and any care costs that insurance doesn't handle, Robert concluded. We've also agreed to family counseling to work through our communication issues. Thomas looked at Judge Williams. Most importantly, this plan keeps Mom in her own home, surrounded by family with professional oversight to ensure her safety. It's the best of all worlds. Helen, who had been listening from her wheelchair, spoke up suddenly. That sounds perfect. Can we go home now? The entire courtroom erupted in gentle laughter. Judge Williams had to wipe her eyes before she could speak. This is extraordinary, the judge said. I've never seen a family transform a guardianship dispute into a care collaboration quite like this. She reviewed the proposed agreement carefully. It was comprehensive, well thought out, and clearly designed with Helen's best interests at heart, rather than anyone's desire to win a legal battle. I'm prepared to approve this joint guardianship arrangement, Judge Williams announced, with Thomas Barrett as primary guardian and his 3 siblings as co-guardians with specific responsibilities. We'll schedule check-ins every 3 months to ensure the arrangement is working for everyone, especially Mrs. Rodriguez. 6 months later, Judge Williams received a holiday card that made her day. It showed 5 people gathered around a Christmas tree. Helen in her wheelchair, surrounded by her 4 children and 2 teenagers who must be Thomas's kids. Helen looked alert and happy, wearing a bright red sweater and a genuine smile. Inside the card, Linda had written, Judge Williams, thank you for helping us find our way back to being a family. Mom is doing wonderfully at home. Her memory isn't getting worse, and some days it even seems better. Thomas says that reducing her stress and keeping her in familiar surroundings has made a huge difference. We've all learned so much about forgiveness and second chances, and about how sometimes the thing you think will tear a family apart can actually bring them closer together. Merry Christmas from the Rodriguez family, all of us. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting that was clearly Helen's, someone had added, Tommy came home. Judge Williams kept that card on her desk for the rest of her career. It reminded her that sometimes the most complicated cases had the simplest solutions, and that families were capable of healing in ways that constantly amazed her. The Rodriguez family had learned that love wasn't about winning or being right. It was about showing up, working together, and sometimes discovering that the person you needed most was someone you never knew existed. Helen lived in her own home for 3 more years, surrounded by the laughter and chaos of a family that had finally learned how to be whole. And every Sunday dinner, she insisted on setting the table for 5, 4 children and all the love they brought with them.